So, talking about the world building in the Hunger Games and what you can learn from it. The first Hunger Games book, so that's The Hunger Games, Catching Fire, and Mockingjay, they're set in a futuristic world of have and have-nots, and that's really typical for dystopian literature. You have people at the top, people at the bottom, you have the oppressors and the oppressed, the whole system's twisted and messed up, and as I often say, dystopian books are often a government trying to solve a real problem in the worst possible way. I mean, the worst nonsensical way. So in this kind of futuristic world of the Hunger Games trilogy, the original trilogy, you have a lot of sort of holographic screens and these super fast elevators and crazy fashion and all of that. It's meant to be a future America. And so you have like this futuristic kind of, place where the Capitol is, and then you have everyone else kind of living in drudgery, but they still sort of have holographic screens or whatever. And especially in the movie, they really make that kind of clear. It's like very futuristic. And always in movies, we often say futuristic equals holograms because we still haven't fully figured that out in our own world yet. And then you may not have a hologram as well. Like people who can't afford it don't have it. So we have that kind of a typical setup for world building. But then we have a prequel, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. That's in the past. So what do you do with that? Like, how do we connect the past to interesting world building? Like, what do you do with that? You can't just do holographs. And it's sort of set in an alternate universe Earth, but it's so disconnected from our Earth that it needs to kind of go in a different direction, but sort of feel the same. Well, since it is in the past, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, and when I'm talking about that, that's the book and the movie, they both pull from the past. So the technology used has more overtones of the 1920s to the 1950s. And you see this very much in the movie as well. We have black and white TVs and maybe some like fuzzy color TVs. Things are very much part of that whole 1920s to 1950s vibes. You have the bands, the covey singing into these giant microphones and etc. It helps things feel older to the reader, but it still weaves them into an alternate world. So she just sort of world built backwards and sideways with that, which is really cool because again, she started out in the future, but she's got to create all this history, but it's got to connect with readers, but it also has to feel like something that's intrinsic to that world. Yep, you are going to get all the nerding out here, and I am not apologizing for it, friends. So thank you for joining me on this adventure. So we have that whole thing with the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. But now with Sunrise on the Reaping, we have the story set between the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes and the Hunger Games. And I'm like, okay, it has to go between that. So the Hunger Games is very like futuristic kind of thing. And then the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes was kind of pulling from 1920s to 1950s kind of vibes. Wait, I hope she goes for like the 1960s and 70s and sort of that quirky, over the top feel from that, because the 1960s and 1970s has had a lot of visual style that really can pull from dystopian ideas. You saw some really good like movies from that time period, incorporating dystopian elements. You had some great things to use in the books. I really hope she does that. I really hope we see some like interesting things with like plastic and things like that and have a kind of a 60s, 70s over the top color scheme vibe. Well, friends, that's what we got. And from the use of plastic and formica and these crazy over the top orangey color schemes in the movie where you have like these the all white clothing the tributes wear, and then the plastic orange shields, and then everything has these strong vibes from the 1960s and 1970s. And I am so here for it, especially because it feels authentic, because it's kind of connecting to what we would see would go between 1920s and then futuristic. And it also connects to Pan Am's own history. So it also feels like it's in between the highly futuristic stuff of the original trilogy and then the stuff from Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, where it's like 10 years out from the Great War and things are a little bit all over the place. And like the Capitol's kind of all put together, but kind of not put together. People are jostling for power and control and everything. So I am here for this. Pulling from the 1960s and 70s vibes just makes so much sense. It helps it to instantly resonate with readers, but keeps it fresh and keeps it in that right place in the timeline. Like you look at it and go, wait, that just feels right. And when you can create world building that a reader is reading it and goes, wow, that just makes sense, that just feels right, you've got it. And she did a great job with that. Like, the way that she thought through it is just fantastic. And that's what I mean by world building sideways. So a lot of times when we're thinking about world building, I think authors try to intrinsically pull from trends of the day or things they're surrounded by, and you can get this really dated feeling to it. But if you can take elements from our world and our culture in different eras and then pull it into the culture and world of your story and make that kind of a different thing, then you can create something timeless while still having it resonate from our own world. So instead of always thinking about building forward, consider how you can build backwards and borrow from the past, and think about how you can build sideways. This is especially relevant when you're thinking about building forward, because at a certain point, we just all know it's holographs. And like, I don't know why we haven't come up with holographs yet in our own world. Maybe the government has some project or some corporation has already done it, but we're still not at the place where we have holographs, or you don't have tablets, you just have these screens or whatever floating in space. For some reason, we don't do that. Maybe there's some kind of anthropological reason. Maybe people just like the feeling of tapping on actual screens. But there's sort of caps on how much you can push futuristic concepts. So the more that you can take different concepts from our culture and different time periods and build it sideways into something unique, the more that you won't be tethered and constricted by what people think makes sense right now. And it keeps your story fresh, but it keeps it timeless. Another story world that does this really well is actually Star Wars. Yes, Star Wars has holograms. Even in the first original A New Hope, the first movie A New Hope, you have the holograms with Princess Leia asking for Obi-Wan Kenobi. But there's also a lot of those wonderfully big chunky buttons and bright squares of color everywhere. And it kind of merges that funky pop culture look of the 50s and 60s with some futuristic elements of sleek droids and spaceships. I love it. And it makes Star Wars have a look that is distinctly Star Wars, especially when we're talking about the time of the rebellion. Like that combination of holograms, but then chunky credit chips, and then you have those big buttons and those random like knobs and pulleys that don't really do anything, but man, they look cool, and they really make it feel decisive, like when someone is attacking someone else. And that's a great example of how, especially the original trilogy, has built a look that is distinctly Star Wars. And I maintain that the TV shows that really own and connect with that original world-building look are the ones that do really well. If you think about it, the show Andor really connected with that same thing. Well, you have holograms and things like that, but you also have the chunky buttons. You have the sleekness of Coruscant, and it feels like it's its own place. You can look at that and go, oh, that might be a bit Art Deco. Oh, that definitely looks, a bit like it came from the Rococo period. And you can see those elements, but it also feels very much like, no, this is Star Wars. And when you've done that, when you've created a world where you've pulled from our different time periods and cultures, but fuse it together in something that is so potently other, you have won, and it is great. And again, that's world building sideways, not being super tethered to our linear path, our linear way of thinking about history. And a similar show that does this really well is the show Skeleton Crew, which is, yes, a Star Wars show. I am here for it because it's basically Treasure Island in space meets Goonies, and having Jude Law play a rogue guy with Jedi powers, slumming as sort of a rogue Jedi power, Long John Silver. And I'm kind of here for this. He was definitely having a great time with that. He made the show awesome. Anyway, in the show Skeleton Crew, there's definitely some solid 1980s vibes. They were definitely pulling from some Goonies vibes, but they also connected with classic Star Wars vibes. And it tapped into that whole make it 80s trend that has been a thing to connect with audiences. But it also builds out the story sideways with existing Star Wars lore, and with those big chunky buttons, and with those pulleys, and with those droids, and all of that stuff. Firefly did something similar with being a sci-fi Western. Again, you're building it sideways. And you could also say things like steampunk, dieselpunk, clockpunk, and the rest do this, although they're specific to different kinds of genres. And so they can be a little more rigid, but they don't really have to be. If you're me, I took my steampunk world and decided to make every single city a different kind of punk because I could. But Even things like that, like steampunk, it is taking something from the past and then building it out sideways and adding new things to it and taking it in different directions. And that makes it more timeless. And so when we're talking about these principles of world building backwards and sideways and making things timeless and not making them so tied to a certain present moment or trend, look for different areas, look into different eras and cultures for inspiration. So look into history and look into trends and fashion and all of those things and think about how you can use that in your story. And of course, do it respectfully, do it thoughtfully, but also do it because there's so many cool things that you can draw inspiration from. Second, figure out how to develop your ideas, the ideas that you're getting influenced by from your research, figure out how to develop them within your own world building and storytelling. What makes sense for you? What ideas are you going to pull from history, but you're going to say, we're going to go in a different direction with this. We're going to say that, at this time period in the 1960s, it went in this direction instead. Video games are really great with this as well. And so you can draw some inspiration from them as well if you are a gamer. But taking those bits of inspiration and saying, but what if things happened differently? And how do I fuse this into what makes sense for my story? Again, for my steampunk world, where I use 4 different kinds of steampunk in it, I wanted each of the different cities to emphasize a different sort of cultural, economic status. So I wanted the Scepter of Commerce to be more 1920s sort of Art Deco kind of vibes to it. Like it's almost Deco punk a bit because I wanted to pull from that angle. And I wanted the Scepter of Knowledge to be a little more like the 1700s Enlightenment period. So I pulled from that more. And I went in all these different directions with that. And then I'm going to go the Scepter of Industry. Well, that's going to be more diesel punk because it's industry. And I'm just going to go for low-hanging fruit there. So you're going to take these ideas and you're going to fuse them into your story world in a way that makes sense for you and will delight your readers and make everyone have a joyful time in your story. And then finally, after you look into different areas and cultures for inspiration and figure out how to develop it in your story world, you're going to use it mindfully and carefully. And that's where you come up with all the cool ideas and then you write your story and your beta readers go, huh? And you go, okay, fine. We might have to tweak that. Building sideways can be a double-edged sword because it keeps your story timeless. But if you heavily pull from a certain era, then readers will catch on and have their own expectations. So you want to use a light touch. And sometimes, depending on if you're actually trying to make some kind of very specific point with the world building, lighter touch is better so that you can make sure that it stays within your story world and you're not pulling too much so that people take your story as commentary on a certain period when you're not going for that. So for example, my most recent publication was Frogs at Noontide. And for that one, I wanted to pull from a vaguely Grecian idea. When I was going for the names, I was typing up and coming up with sort of Grecian names. And I was thinking about, okay, how are the buildings? Are they going to have lots of columns and colonnades and those things and sprinkling little bits in there? But I'm like, I don't think we want to do togas and stolas and those things. Like, I want to keep this connected enough with the other books in this world. And the other books are more of like bodices and more classic, trousers and tunics and those things that you expect from fairy tales. We're not going to go all the way Grecian where everyone's wearing, stolas or, togas or things like that and sandals everywhere. I'm going to pull back from that a bit so it matches my story world because I'm not really trying to recreate a full Grecian effect. Now, if you are trying to create a certain effect, go for it, but do it mindfully. And that way you can evoke the kind of impact in readers that you want. You can help them escape into the world that you want them to escape into and not something that ends up confusing them. So that is the story of world building sideways. And it really does help you to create and flesh out story worlds that are unique. And it's a great cheat and hack. You can use it as much or as little as you want to create some different flavors for your story. And again, The Hunger Games is a great example of this, and I love it because she kind of started in the future and then she's kind of world built back and sideways. But together, it really makes sense as a cohesive world, and you really feel like you're getting the full history of Panem from these prequels. It's fascinating to see, and I'm excited to see how the movie executes her vision as well. Thank you so much for tuning in with me for this very special live stream of author culture. And again, please do share thoughts, feelings, ideas respectfully in a comment below. I would love to hear them, and let me know what things you might like to see in the future should I do more live streams, because they're fun for me. Hopefully they're fun for you. And I'm so glad you're here. And if you are interested in, a Frog Prince retelling, vaguely inspired by Grecian ideas, but ultimately possessing quite a lot of frogs and shenanigans and a happily ever after, and a main character who is very clever and stubborn, but not very smart, which is an interesting combination, hop over and check that out. This is Gina Polito, and your existence is fantastic. Go forth and be awesome.